The lightning split the sky like a jagged blade, and Katherine Monroe knew she had about 3 seconds before 1,500 head of cattle turned into a stampeding wall of death. She was 22 years old and had been working the trail drive since she was old enough to sit a horse properly, following her father's ranch hands from Kansas to Colorado every summer since she was 14. Her father, Thomas Monroe, owned one of the largest cattle operations in Kansas, and Katherine had learned young that being a woman meant working twice as hard for half the respect. She had proven herself year after year, but this drive was different. This time, her father had stayed behind to manage a land deal, and she was leading 300 of their best cattle to market in Cannon City, Colorado, alongside the massive herd belonging to the Thornton Ranch. The year was 1884, and the cattle business was changing. The open range was closing. Railroads were spreading like spider webs across the plains, and everyone knew the great trail drives would not last forever. This might be one of the last big pushes north before winter settled into the mountains, and every ranch within 200 miles had pooled their herds together for the final drive of the season. Ethan Thornton sat his horse 50 yards to Katherine's left when the first bolt of lightning struck. He was 25, tall and lean with dark hair that always seemed to need cutting and green eyes that noticed everything. He had taken over his father's ranch 2 years earlier when influenza swept through their county, and he ran it with the same steady determination his father had shown. Ethan had heard about Katherine Monroe for years, the woman who could rope and ride better than most men, who had a way with horses that seemed almost magical. But he had never actually met her until 3 weeks ago when their herds merged at the Kansas border. The storm had been building all afternoon, dark clouds piling up against the Rocky Mountains like a bruise spreading across the sky. The cattle had been restless since noon, sensing the pressure in the air, and every cowhand on the drive had been watching the horizon with growing dread. They were 2 days outside Cannon City, camped in a broad valley with the Arkansas River running silver to the south and pine-covered hills rising on either side. When the lightning struck, it hit a dead cottonwood tree on the eastern ridge. The tree exploded in a shower of sparks and flame, and the crack of thunder that followed was so loud it seemed to shake the ground itself. The cattle bellowed in terror, and Katherine saw the whole herd begin to surge and shift like a single living creature preparing to run. "Hold them!" Ethan shouted, but his voice was nearly lost in another roll of thunder. The other cowboys were already moving, trying to position themselves around the herd, but Katherine knew it was too late for that. She could see it in the way the cattle were bunching together, in the wild rolling of their eyes and the way their heads were coming up. In about 10 seconds, they would bolt, and anyone caught in their path would be trampled into the mud. She did not hesitate. Katherine spurred her horse, a steady buckskin mare named Juniper, and rode straight toward the front of the herd. Rain was beginning to fall now, fat drops that hit like pebbles, and another bolt of lightning illuminated the valley in stark white light. The cattle were moving faster, breaking into a trot, their hooves drumming against the earth. Katherine began to sing. It was an old song her mother had taught her before the fever took her when Katherine was 9 years old. The melody was slow and sweet, a lullaby really, meant for soothing frightened children in the dark. Katherine's voice rose clear and strong above the storm, and she kept singing as she guided Juniper in a wide arc across the front of the herd. The lead steers faltered, confusion breaking through their panic. Katherine kept singing, her voice never wavering even as rain soaked through her shirt and lightning turned the world electric blue. She knew the other cowboys were watching her, probably thinking she had lost her mind, but she also knew cattle. They were herd animals, followers, and if she could turn the leaders, the rest would follow. She kept Juniper moving, not too fast, just a steady walk that forced the lead cattle to slow down to avoid running into her. And she kept singing, the same verse over and over, her voice a constant thread of calm in the chaos of the storm. Ethan watched from his position and felt something shift in his chest. He had seen skilled cowboys work spooked cattle before, had seen men risk their lives to turn a stampede, but he had never seen anything like this. Katherine Monroe sat her horse like she was part of the animal itself, completely relaxed even with 1,500 head of panicked cattle surging toward her, and she was singing to them like they were children afraid of the dark. It should not have worked. By every rule of cattle and common sense, it should not have worked. But somehow, impossibly, it did. The lead steers slowed to a walk, then stopped entirely, confused by the calm woman on the horse who refused to run. The cattle behind them had to stop as well, bunching up but no longer stampeding. Katherine kept singing, kept moving Juniper in slow circles, and gradually the entire herd settled. They were nervous, still snorting and shifting, but they were not running. The rain came harder, turning the valley into a gray curtain of water, but the lightning was moving off to the north now, the thunder growing more distant. Katherine finally stopped singing and just sat there on Juniper, letting the rain wash over her, feeling the trembling in her own legs that she had not allowed herself to feel while the danger was immediate. Ethan rode up beside her, his own horse dancing nervously. Water dripped from the brim of his hat, and his shirt was plastered to his shoulders. "That was the bravest damn thing I have ever seen," he said, and his voice was rough with something that might have been fear or admiration or both. Katherine turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time. She had been aware of Ethan Thornton during the drive, of course. It was impossible not to notice him, the way he sat his horse, the quiet authority he had with his men, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when something amused him. But she had kept her distance, the way she always did. Men on cattle drives either resented her for being better than them or treated her like a curiosity, and she had no patience for either attitude. But the way Ethan was looking at her now was different. There was respect in his eyes, real respect, and something else she could not quite name. Something that made her aware of how close he was, of the rain on his face and the strength in his hands as he held his reins. It was just a song, she said, but her voice came out softer than she intended. It was more than that. Ethan's horse shifted, bringing him even closer. "You saved this whole drive. If those cattle had run, we would have lost days rounding them up, probably lost some over cliffs or in the river. You saved us." Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold rain. Any good cowhen would have done the same. "No," Ethan said quietly. "They would not have, because they would not have thought of it and they would not have had the courage to try it." He paused, rain streaming down his face, and Katherine saw his jaw tighten as if he was making some kind of decision. "Katherine Monroe, I think you might be the most remarkable woman I have ever met." Before Katherine could respond, one of Ethan's men rode up, a grizzled cowboy named Pete who had been working cattle since before Katherine was born. "Boss, we should get the herd settled and make camp. This rain is not going to let up any time soon." Ethan nodded but did not take his eyes off Katherine. "Right," Pete spread the word. "Tell everyone Miss Monroe is in charge of settling the herd. Whatever she says goes." Pete's eyebrows went up, but he just nodded and rode off. That casual delegation of authority, the public acknowledgement of her skill, meant more to Katherine than any compliment ever could. She felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something dangerous and thrilling. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Nothing to thank me for. You earned it." Ethan finally looked away, scanning the herd and the rain-soaked valley. "We should probably get these cattle bedded down before something else spooks them." They worked together for the next 2 hours, directing the other cowboys, making sure the herd was settled in a spot with good drainage and some shelter from the wind. The rain continued, a steady downpour that turned everything to mud and made every task twice as difficult. But the cattle remained calm, tired from their near stampede and lulled by the rhythmic sound of rain on grass. By the time they got the camp set up, with fires going under makeshift canvas shelters and coffee boiling in battered pots, it was nearly dark. Katherine was soaked through, her clothes heavy with water and her boots squelching with every step. But she helped tend the horses before she thought about herself, making sure Juniper was rubbed down and had grain, talking softly to the mare and thanking her for her steadiness during the storm. She was still with the horses when Ethan found her. He had changed into a dry shirt, though his hair was still wet, and he was carrying a tin cup of coffee and a blanket. "You need to get dry," he said, holding out the blanket. "Pete says the rain should clear by morning, but it is going to be a cold night." Katherine took the blanket gratefully, wrapping it around her shoulders. The coffee was hot and bitter and perfect, and she wrapped her cold hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "You take care of everyone else before yourself," Ethan observed. It was not quite a question, but Katherine heard the curiosity in it. "That is what you do on a drive," she said. "The animals come first. They depend on us. Most people would have gotten themselves warm and dry first." "Especially after what you just did," Katherine shrugged, uncomfortable with the continued attention. "I was not the only one working. Everyone did their part." Ethan smiled, a slow, warming expression that changed his whole face. "You do not take compliments well, do you? I am not used to them." Katherine realized how that sounded and tried to soften it. "I mean, on a ranch, you just do your job. Nobody expects thanks for it." "Maybe they should." Ethan leaned against the fence rail, close enough that Katherine could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. "Your father must be proud of you." "My father thinks I should be home learning to run a household and finding a husband." The words came out more bitter than Katherine intended, and she took a quick sip of coffee to cover it. "But you are here instead, leading a cattle drive." "I convinced him I could get better prices for our stock if I delivered them personally." "Which is true. Buyers try to cheat you if you are not there to negotiate." Katherine looked out at the settled herd, dark shapes in the gathering dusk. "And I needed to prove to him that I can do this. That I can run our ranch someday if he will let me." "Will he?" Katherine was quiet for a moment. "I have 2 younger brothers. Thomas is 18 and Benjamin is 16. My father expects one of them to take over. But Thomas wants to be a lawyer, and Benjamin is more interested in books than cattle. Neither of them has any feel for the work. I am the one who loves it, who understands it, but I am a woman, so—" She trailed off, the unfairness of it sitting heavy in her throat. "That seems like a waste," Ethan said quietly. "You have a gift with animals. I saw it today, but I have been watching you throughout this drive. The horses trust you. The cattle trust you. That is not something you can teach. Either you have it or you do not." Katherine felt her heart beating faster. Nobody had ever put it into words like that before, had never validated what she felt in her bones to be true. "What about you?" she asked, wanting to shift the focus away from herself. "Did you always want to run your father's ranch?" Ethan's expression changed, something sad moving behind his eyes. "I wanted to be a carpenter. I was apprenticed to a master craftsman in Denver for a year, learning to build furniture. I loved it, the smell of fresh wood, the way you could see something take shape under your hands." He looked down at his hands, scarred and calloused from rope and reins. But then my parents got sick, and my father died, and my mother followed 3 days later. I came home for the funeral and just never left. The ranch needed someone, the men needed someone, and I was the only family left." "That must have been hard," Katherine said softly. "It was, but it was also the right thing to do. And I found I was good at it, running the ranch. Maybe not as good as I would have been at carpentry, but good enough. Sometimes life does not give you what you want. It gives you what you need, and you make the best of it." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain drumming on canvas and the low sounds of the settled herd. Around them, the other cowboys were huddled around fires, eating dinner and swapping stories. The smell of coffee and wood smoke drifted through the wet air. "That song you were singing," Ethan said eventually. "During the storm, what was it? Just an old lullaby. My mother used to sing it when I was little and could not sleep." Katherine felt the familiar ache of loss, dulled by time but never entirely gone. "She died when I was 9, some kind of fever that swept through our county. We lost a lot of people that year. I am sorry. It was a long time ago." Katherine finished her coffee and looked up at Ethan, finding him already watching her with those steady green eyes. "But I remember that song. And I remembered how it always made me feel safe, even when I was scared. I thought maybe it would work on the cattle too. It did more than work. It was brilliant." Ethan straightened up, and for a moment Katherine thought he was going to reach for her, touch her hand or her shoulder, but he just adjusted his hat and gave her a small smile. "You should get some food and rest. We have a long day tomorrow if we are going to make Cannon City on schedule." Katherine nodded, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the day settling into her bones. But as Ethan started to walk away, she found herself calling after him. "Ethan!" He turned back, eyebrows raised. "Thank you for listening, and for treating me like a real cowhand instead of a novelty." His smile widened. "Katherine, you are the best cowhand on this drive. Everyone knows it. I am just the first one with the sense to say it out loud." He tipped his hat to her and disappeared into the rainy darkness, leaving Katherine standing there with her heart doing strange things in her chest. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having swept through and left everything scrubbed clean and sparkling. The grass was heavy with dew, and the mountains to the west stood out in sharp relief against a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The cattle were calm and ready to move, and the cowboys broke camp quickly, eager to make up for the time lost to the storm. Katherine had slept badly, her dreams full of lightning and dark green eyes, and she woke before dawn feeling restless and strange. She told herself it was just the aftermath of yesterday's danger, the way your body sometimes held on to fear even after the threat had passed. But she knew it was more than that. She could not stop thinking about Ethan Thornton, about the way he had looked at her in the rain, about the warmth in his voice when he called her remarkable. She was being foolish. Katherine had learned early on that mixing romance with work was a recipe for disaster. She had seen it happen on other drives, cowgirls who fell for ranch hands and ended up pregnant or heartbroken or both, their reputations ruined and their careers over. She had sworn she would never be that stupid, never let some man derail her plans just because he had nice eyes and a good smile. But Ethan was different. He was not just some ranch hand. He was an owner like her, someone who understood the weight of responsibility and the love of the work. And the way he had trusted her judgment, had publicly deferred to her expertise, showed a respect she had never encountered before in a man. Katherine shook her head as she saddled Juniper, annoyed with herself. 2 days. They would be in Cannon City in 2 days, sell the cattle, and go their separate ways. Ethan back to his ranch, Katherine back to hers. There was no point in spinning fantasies about a man she barely knew, But fate had other plans. They had been driving the herd for about 3 hours, making good time through the valley when one of the younger cowboys came galloping back from scout position. His name was Jimmy, barely 18, and he looked scared. "Mr. Thornton, Miss Monroe, there is something you need to see." Ethan and Katherine rode forward together, following Jimmy up a small rise. What they saw on the other side made Katherine's blood run cold. The bridge. The only bridge across the Arkansas River for 20 miles in either direction was damaged. Not completely destroyed, but several of the support beams were cracked and sagging, probably weakened by years of spring floods and finished off by yesterday's storm. The river was running high and fast, swollen with rain, and there was no way the bridge would hold 1,500 head of cattle. "Damn," Ethan said softly. He dismounted and walked out onto the bridge, testing the boards carefully. Katherine followed, feeling the structure sway ominously under their combined weight. Up close, the damage was even worse. The whole western side of the bridge was ready to collapse. "We cannot cross here," Katherine said. "No." Ethan stood there, hands on his hips, staring at the river. "But we cannot go around either. The next bridge is 2 days north, and we would miss the market. The buyers are counting on our herd arriving on schedule. If we are late, they will have already bought from someone else." "We could try to ford the river," one of the other cowboys suggested, but Ethan shook his head. "Too deep, too fast. We would lose cattle and probably men too. It is not worth the risk." He looked at Katherine. "What do you think?" Katherine felt a flutter of pleasure that he was asking her opinion, treating her like a partner instead of just another hired hand. She walked back onto the bridge, knelt down, and examined the structure more carefully. The eastern side was still solid, and the central supports looked intact. It was just the western approach that was badly damaged. "What if we reinforce it?" she said slowly, an idea forming. "We have tools, we have rope, we have lumber in the supply wagon for repairs. If we can shore up the damaged sections, we might be able to get the herd across." It would not need to last forever, just long enough for one crossing. Ethan was beside her in an instant, looking where she was pointing. "It might work, but it would take time. We would need to do it right, make sure it is safe. Then we better get started." They worked all day. Ethan sent 2 men to ride ahead to Cannon City and tell the buyers they would be delayed but arriving. Everyone else pitched in on the bridge repair. They cut timber from the surrounding forest, using axes and sweat to bring down straight pines that could serve as temporary supports. They drove posts into the riverbank and lashed crossbeams with every inch of rope they had. Katherine worked alongside the men, her hands blistering from the unfamiliar work with hammer and saw, but she never complained and never stopped. Ethan worked beside her, and Katherine found herself intensely aware of his presence. The way his shoulders moved under his shirt as he swung the axe. The concentration on his face as he measured and cut timber. The easy way he had with his men, never ordering but always leading, doing the hardest work himself, and never asking anyone to do something he would not do. Once, when they were both under the bridge, waist deep in the cold river water as they secured a support beam, Ethan looked over at her and grinned. "This is probably not what you imagined when you signed on for a cattle drive." Katherine laughed, actually laughed, something she had not done since the drive started. "No, I usually avoid swimming in freezing water while holding up a bridge. I am funny like that. You are full of surprises, Katherine Monroe. So are you, Ethan Thornton." Their eyes met and held, and for a moment the cold water and the aching muscles and everything else faded away. There was just the 2 of them, standing together in a river, working together to solve a problem. Partners. Then Pete yelled something from above, and the moment broke. but the warmth of it stayed with Katherine all through the rest of the day. By evening, the bridge was as ready as they could make it. It was not pretty, and it probably would not last through another storm, but it was solid enough to hold cattle. They tested it carefully, sending riders across one at a time, then in pairs, then leading pack horses weighted with gear. The bridge held. "We will cross at first light," Ethan announced to the assembled cowboys. "We will take it slow, keep the cattle calm. No more than 20 head on the bridge at any time. It is going to take hours, but we are not going to rush it and risk someone getting hurt." They ate dinner around the fire that night, everyone tired but satisfied with the day's work. Someone had brought out a harmonica, and soft music drifted through the camp. The stars came out, brilliant and sharp in the clear air, and Katherine sat on a log near the fire, feeling the heat on her face and the cold at her back. Ethan settled down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. He did not say anything for a long moment, just sat there looking into the fire. "My father used to say that you can tell a lot about a person by how they handle a crisis," he said finally. "Whether they panic or whether they think, whether they look for someone to blame or look for a solution." He turned his head to look at Katherine, firelight reflecting in his eyes. "You are the kind of person who finds solutions, and that is a rare thing." "So are you," Katherine said softly. "You could have sent men back to your ranch for help or tried to force the river. But you listened to ideas and we worked together. That is rare too. Most men I know would rather fail on their own than succeed with help." "I am not most men." "No," Katherine agreed. "You are not." Ethan shifted on the log, turning more toward her. "Katherine, I need to tell you something. I have been thinking about it all day, and I am not sure I am going to get another chance before we reach Cannon City and go our separate ways." Katherine's heart started beating faster. "What is it?" "Yesterday, when I saw you ride toward that herd during the storm, I thought you were the bravest person I had ever known. And when you started singing and those cattle actually calmed down, I thought you might be the smartest too." He paused, and Katherine could see the struggle on his face, the way he was trying to find the right words. "But it was not until tonight, working with you on that bridge, that I realized something. I do not want to go our separate ways. I want to know you better. I want to spend more time with you. I want—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I am making a mess of this." "No," Katherine whispered. "You are not. I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other, but I have never felt this way before, like I met someone who sees the world the way I do. Someone who understands what it means to love this life, this work. Someone who would risk everything to save a herd of cattle because it is the right thing to do." He reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. "Katherine, I would like to court you, properly, if you would let me." Katherine's mind was racing. This was dangerous territory. If she said yes, she was risking everything she had worked for. Her father would not approve. A romance with another rancher could complicate business dealings. If it went badly, she could lose not just a suitor but a professional contact. There were 100 practical reasons to say no, but when she looked into Ethan's eyes, all those practical reasons seemed to fade away, because he was right. There was something between them, something real and rare. And Katherine had spent her whole life being practical, always putting work first and her own feelings last. Maybe, just this once, she could take a risk on something that had nothing to do with cattle or ranches or proving herself. "Yes," she said, and watched his face light up like sunrise. "Yes, I would like that." Ethan's grin was so wide and genuine that Katherine could not help smiling back. He squeezed her hand gently, and they sat there together by the fire, not talking, just being together, while around them the camp settled down for the night and the stars wheeled slowly overhead. The crossing of the bridge the next morning was tense but successful. They moved the cattle across in small groups, just as Ethan had planned, keeping them calm and steady. Katherine and Ethan worked together, positioning themselves on either side of the bridge, their voices calm and reassuring as they guided the nervous animals across. The bridge groaned and swayed but held, and by mid-afternoon the entire herd was safely across. A cheer went up from the cowboys when the last animal made it over, and Katherine felt a surge of pride and relief so strong it made her lightheaded. They had done it. Against the odds, they had kept the herd together and on schedule. Ethan rode up beside her, his face streaked with dust and sweat, and held out his hand. Katherine clasped it, and they shook firmly, the gesture of respect between equals. But Ethan held on a moment longer than necessary, and the look in his eyes made Katherine's breath catch. They reached the outskirts of Cannon City the next morning. The town sprawled in a valley with the Arkansas River on one side and the mountains rising dramatic and snow-capped on the other. Cannon City was a booming town in 1884, the railroads having reached it just a few years earlier, and it had become a major hub for cattle sales. The stockyards on the edge of town could hold thousands of head, and buyers came from as far as Denver and Kansas City to purchase beef. The sale took 2 days. Katherine and Ethan worked together, negotiating with buyers, comparing offers, making sure they got fair prices for their stock. Katherine found she liked working with Ethan this way, the give and take of negotiation, the way they could communicate with just a look across the sale pen. She was good at reading buyers, could tell when they were bluffing about prices, and Ethan was good at sealing deals, at finding the compromise that left everyone satisfied. By the end of the second day, they had sold every head of cattle for prices that exceeded both their expectations. Ethan's men would drive the ranch's supply wagons back to his spread, while Katherine's small crew would head back to Kansas. But before any of that happened, there was the traditional end of drive celebration. The cowboys descended on Cannon City's saloons like a thirsty horde, eager to spend some of their pay and blow off steam after weeks on the trail. Katherine usually avoided these celebrations, uncomfortable with the drinking and gambling and the way men acted when they thought no one important was watching. But Ethan found her at the hotel where she had taken a room for the night and convinced her to join him for dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. Katherine had not packed anything fancy for the drive, but she had one good dress in her saddlebag, a deep blue cotton with lace at the collar that she had brought just in case. She washed the trail dust from her hair and skin, braided her long dark hair into a neat coil at the nape of her neck, and put on the dress. When she looked at herself in the small mirror in her hotel room, she barely recognized the woman looking back. For weeks she had been just another cowhand, dressed in men's work clothes, her hair hidden under a hat. Now she looked like a lady. She almost lost her nerve and changed back into her regular clothes. But then she thought about the way Ethan had looked at her that night by the fire, and she took a deep breath and went downstairs. Ethan was waiting in the hotel lobby, and when he saw her coming down the stairs, he stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. He had cleaned up too, wearing dark trousers and a white shirt with a string tie, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished. But it was the expression on his face that made Katherine's pulse quicken. He looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Katherine," he said softly, "you look stunning." "You clean up pretty well yourself," she managed to say, pleased that her voice came out steady. He offered her his arm, and they walked together through the dusty streets of Cannon City to the restaurant. It was a nice place, with real tablecloths and candles and a menu written on a chalkboard. They ordered steaks and potatoes and good red wine, and they talked for hours, not about cattle or ranches or business, but about everything else. About the books they had read, their favorite memories from childhood, places they dreamed of seeing someday. Ethan told her about his brief time in Denver, about the furniture he had made, about the feeling of creating something beautiful with your own hands. Katherine told him about growing up without a mother, about learning to rope from the ranch hands, about the first time she had successfully delivered a breech calf, and how her father had actually smiled at her. The restaurant closed around them, and they had to leave, walking slowly back toward the hotel through streets that had gone quiet as the night grew late. The air was cool and smelled of pine from the nearby mountains. "I do not want this night to end," Ethan said quietly. They had reached the hotel steps, and he turned to face her, backlit by the warm light spilling from the windows. "I know you have to head back to Kansas tomorrow, and I have to get back to my ranch. But Katherine, I meant what I said before. I want to court you. I want to see where this goes." Katherine looked up at him, at this good man who saw her as an equal, who respected her skills and did not feel threatened by her competence. "How would it even work? Your ranch is in Colorado, mine is in Kansas. That is weeks of travel between us. I will travel. I will come to Kansas, visit you properly, meet your father, and you can come to Colorado. We will make it work if you want it to work." He reached up slowly and cupped her cheek with his hand, his thumb brushing along her jawline. "Do you want it to work?" Katherine knew she should be cautious. Knew she should protect her heart and her future. But standing there in the moonlight, looking into Ethan Thornton's steady green eyes, she could not bring herself to play it safe. "Yes," she whispered. "I want it to work." Ethan smiled, slow and warm, and then he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, questioning, and Katherine answered by rising up on her toes and kissing him back. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and for a moment everything else fell away. There was just the two of them, and the promise of something wonderful beginning. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I will come to Kansas in 2 weeks," he said. "I will visit you properly, and I will convince your father that I am worthy of his daughter." That might be harder than calming a spooked herd, Katherine warned, but she was smiling. "Then I better start practicing my lullabies." Katherine laughed and kissed him again, quick and joyful, and then slipped into the hotel before she could do something foolish like invite him up to her room. She stood in the lobby, listening to his footsteps fade away on the street outside, and pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. The journey back to Kansas took 12 days. Katherine rode with her small crew, 3 ranch hands who worked for her father year-round, and the whole time she could not stop thinking about Ethan. She relived every conversation they had shared, every look and touch, and she worried. What if her father refused to receive him? What if Ethan changed his mind once he was back at his own ranch, surrounded by the familiar routines of his life? What if she had been a fool to trust her heart? But when she got home to the sprawling Monroe Ranch outside of Wichita, her father took one look at her face and said, "What happened to you?" Katherine had been unpacking Juniper's saddle bags in the barn, and she looked up in surprise. Thomas Monroe was a big man, broad-shouldered and stern-faced, the kind of man who had carved a ranch out of raw prairie through sheer will and hard work. He was not given to fanciful notions or emotional displays, and Katherine had learned early to match his practical approach to life. "What do you mean?" she asked. "You look different, happy." He said it like it was a strange condition he had never encountered before. "Did the sale go well?" "Very well. We got top prices for our stock, and I have the contracts here." Katherine pulled out the papers from her bag and handed them over. Her father studied them carefully, his eyes widening slightly as he saw the numbers. "This is excellent work, Katherine. Well done." It was high praise from him, and Katherine felt a warm glow of satisfaction. But then her father looked at her again, suspicious. "But that does not explain why you have been grinning like a fool since you rode in. Something else happened." Katherine took a deep breath. There was no point in hiding it. Ethan would be here in less than a week, and she needed to prepare her father. "I met someone, a rancher from Colorado. His name is Ethan Thornton, and he owns a large cattle operation near Cannon City. We led the drive together and we became friends, more than friends." She met her father's eyes steadily. "He is going to visit us soon. He wants to court me properly." Thomas Monroe's face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, concern, calculation, and finally resignation. "A rancher," he said slowly. "From Colorado." "Yes." "And you like this man?" "I do. Very much." Katherine braced herself for the argument she knew was coming, the lecture about practical matches and not letting emotion cloud judgment. But her father just sighed and sat down heavily on a hay bale. "Your mother would have been better at this conversation than me. She always knew what to say about matters of the heart." He was quiet for a moment, looking down at his calloused hands. "Katherine, you are 22 years old. You are smarter and more capable than most men I know. If you think this Ethan Thornton is worth your time, then I will trust your judgment. But I will also make sure he understands what kind of family he is courting into." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and warm. "You will receive him. Give him a chance." "I will." "But Katherine, you need to understand something." Her father looked up at her, and his expression was sad. "If you marry this man, you will likely move to Colorado, and while I appreciate everything you have done for this ranch, I cannot hold it for you if you are not going to be here to run it. I will need to make other arrangements." The words hit Katherine like a physical blow. She had known this logically, of course, but hearing it said out loud made it real. If she chose Ethan, she was choosing to give up her dream of running the Monroe Ranch. She would be starting over, building a life in Colorado, becoming part of Ethan's world instead of claiming her own. "I understand," she said quietly. Her father stood up and walked over to her, putting his big hands on her shoulders. "But maybe that is not such a bad thing. Maybe you can build something even better in Colorado, something that is truly yours instead of just inherited. And Katherine, if this man makes you happy, if he respects you and values you, then that is worth more than any ranch." Katherine hugged her father, something she had not done since she was a child, and felt his arms come around her, strong and steady. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan arrived 6 days later, riding a handsome gray gelding and leading a pack horse loaded with gifts. Katherine saw him coming up the long drive to the ranch house and had to force herself not to run out to meet him. Instead, she waited on the porch, hands clasped in front of her, trying to look calm and collected even though her heart was hammering in her chest. He dismounted and walked up to the porch, and for a moment they just looked at each other, both grinning like idiots. Then Katherine could not help herself. She ran down the steps and straight into his arms, and he caught her and swung her around, laughing. "I missed you," he said against her hair. "I missed you too." Katherine pulled back enough to look at his face, reassuring herself that he was real and here. "How was your journey? Long, but worth it." He set her down gently but kept one arm around her waist. "Is your father home? I want to meet him properly." "He is in his study, probably sharpening his shotgun." Ethan paled slightly. "You are joking." "Maybe." Katherine took his hand and led him toward the house. "Come on, let's get this over with." The meeting between Ethan Thornton and Thomas Monroe went better than Katherine had dared hope. The two men sized each other up like bulls meeting in a pasture. But then they started talking about cattle and land management and market prices. And within half an hour, they were deep in conversation like old friends. Katherine sat and listened, pleased and a little amused at how easily they connected. Over dinner that night, with Katherine's two younger brothers present and peppering Ethan with questions about Colorado and ranch life, Ethan formally asked Thomas for permission to court Katherine. "I know this is fast, sir," Ethan said, his voice steady but respectful. "And I know Katherine and I have not known each other long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Your daughter is the most remarkable woman I have ever met. She is brave and smart and capable, and I would be honored if you would allow me to court her with the intention of marriage." Thomas Monroe looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the hope in her eyes. "Katherine is a grown woman and capable of making her own choices. But since you have asked my permission, I will give it with one condition." "Name it," Ethan said immediately. "If my daughter agrees to marry you, you will treat her as an equal partner in your ranch. Not a decoration, not a housewife, but a true partner. I have watched her work too hard and prove herself too many times to see her relegated to a kitchen and sewing room." Ethan turned to Katherine, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. "Sir, I would not have it any other way. Katherine's skills with cattle and horses are better than mine. I would be a fool not to make her a full partner. Then you have my blessing." The courtship that followed was unlike anything Katherine had experienced before. Ethan stayed at a boarding house in Wichita for 3 weeks, riding out to the Monroe Ranch every day. They went on long rides together, exploring the Kansas prairie, and they worked together too, Ethan helping with the ranch chores and Katherine showing him improvements her father had made to their breeding program. But mostly they talked. They talked about everything under the sun, learning each other's stories, sharing dreams and fears and hopes. Ethan told her about the loneliness of running a ranch alone, about the weight of being responsible for dozens of men and thousands of animals. Katherine told him about the frustration of being dismissed because of her gender, about the fear that she would never get to fully use her talents. "Come to Colorado with me," Ethan said one evening. They were sitting by the creek that ran through the Monroe property, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. "Not to marry me, not yet. Just to see my ranch, meet my men, see if you could be happy there. I know I am asking you to give up a lot, and I do not want you to feel pressured. But I need you to see what we could build together." Katherine looked at him, this man who had somehow become essential to her in just a few short weeks. "All right, I will come to Colorado." They left 2 days later, Katherine chaperoned by her brother Thomas, who wanted to see more of the West anyway and was happy for an adventure. The journey took them through Kansas and into Colorado, following the Arkansas River west into the mountains. The landscape changed as they traveled, the flat plains giving way to rolling hills and then dramatic rock formations and towering peaks. Ethan's ranch was nestled in a valley south of Cannon City, with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rising purple and majestic to the west. It was beautiful country, wilder and more rugged than Kansas, and Katherine fell in love with it immediately. The ranch house was a long, low building made of local stone and pine logs, with a wide porch that looked out over the valley. It was comfortable but simple, clearly built by a man who cared more about function than fancy decoration. The barns and outbuildings were well maintained, and the cattle Katherine could see grazing in the distance looked healthy and well fed. But it was the way Ethan's men greeted him that told Katherine the most. They respected him, genuinely liked him, and they were openly curious about Katherine. Pete, the grizzled cowboy from the drive, gave her a gap-toothed grin and said, "Good to see you again, Miss Monroe." We have been hoping the boss would have the sense to bring you back." Ethan showed Katherine and Thomas around the ranch, explaining his operation and his plans for the future. He wanted to improve his breeding stock, experiment with crossbreeding to produce cattle that could handle the harsh mountain winters. He wanted to expand into the high meadows to the west, where there was good summer grazing. He had ideas about water management and erosion control, about building a legacy that would last generations. And as he talked, Katherine could see herself fitting into those plans, not as a decoration or an accessory, but as a true partner. Someone who could contribute ideas and skills, who could help make this ranch into something extraordinary. That night, after Thomas had gone to bed in the guest room, Katherine and Ethan sat on the porch together, wrapped in blankets against the cool mountain air. The stars overhead were brilliant, seeming close enough to touch. "What do you think?" Ethan asked quietly. Could you be happy here? Katherine thought about Kansas, about the ranch she had grown up on, about the dream of running the Monroe operation someday. And then she thought about building something new, something that would truly be hers and Ethan's together, about this beautiful wild country and the man beside her who saw her as an equal. "Yes," she said, "I think I could be very happy here." Ethan turned to her, and in the starlight she could see the emotion on his face. "Katherine Monroe, I love you. I think I have loved you since I saw you ride into that storm singing to spooked cattle. You are brave and brilliant and everything I did not know I was looking for. Will you marry me?" Katherine felt tears slip down her cheeks, happy tears this time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Ethan kissed her then, deep and joyful, and Katherine kissed him back, pouring all her hope and love into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small ruby. "I know it is not fancy, but I thought you might like something practical." Katherine laughed through her tears. "It is perfect." She held out her hand, and Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Cannon City, with Katherine's father and brothers and a handful of close friends in attendance. It was a simple ceremony, but Katherine wore a beautiful white dress that Ethan's housekeeper had helped her sew, and Ethan wore a new suit that actually fit him properly. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Katherine like he would never let her go, and the small congregation cheered. The first year of their marriage was not easy. Katherine had to adjust to a new place and new people, had to learn the rhythms of a different ranch and earn the respect of cowboys who were not sure what to make of a woman owner. But she and Ethan worked side by side, and gradually the ranch hands came to accept her, then respect her, and finally rely on her judgment. Katherine implemented new breeding programs and improved their calf survival rates. She started working with the wild horses that roamed the high country, gentling them and training them to sell as saddle stock. She and Ethan argued sometimes, passionate disagreements about ranch management and priorities, but they always talked it through and found compromises. And at night, when the work was done and they lay together in their bed, Ethan would hold her close and tell her he loved her, and Katherine would think about how lucky she was to have found a man who let her be herself. 2 years after their marriage, Katherine gave birth to their first child, a son they named James. He had Ethan's dark hair and Katherine's brown eyes, and he was strong and healthy from the start. Katherine was back helping with ranch work within a month, carrying baby James in a sling while she checked on the cattle. And nobody thought it strange, because by then she was just Katherine, an essential part of the ranch. 3 years after James came another son, Samuel, and 2 years after that a daughter they named Rose. The house that had seemed too big and empty when Katherine first arrived was now full of noise and life and love. The children grew up on horseback, learning to work cattle almost before they could walk, and Katherine taught them all the lullaby her mother had taught her, the one that could calm spooked animals and frighten children alike. The ranch prospered under Katherine and Ethan's joint management. Their crossbred cattle became famous throughout Colorado for their hardiness and quality. Other ranchers came to them for advice and to purchase breeding stock. And through it all, Katherine and Ethan remained partners in the truest sense, making decisions together, respecting each other's judgment, building something that was greater than either of them could have created alone. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan gave Katherine a surprise. He had been working on something in secret for months, and when he finally revealed it, Katherine cried. It was a sign for the ranch entrance, beautifully carved from oak. It read, Thornton Monroe Ranch, EST, 1884, built on partnership and love. I wanted everyone to know that this is as much yours as it is mine, Ethan said, holding her close. I wanted our children to understand that their mother is not just a rancher's wife, but a rancher herself. And I wanted you to know that the best decision I ever made was riding up beside you that day in the storm and asking you your name. Katherine kissed him, long and sweet, thinking about how far they had come from that rainy valley, where she had calmed a spooked herd by singing. The best decision I ever made was singing that day instead of running, because it brought you into my life. The years continued to pass, full of hard work and joy and the inevitable sorrows that come with any life. They lost cattle to harsh winters and disease. They struggled through droughts and floods. Katherine's father died when Rose was 5, leaving the Monroe Ranch to Thomas, who ran it well but never with the passion Katherine would have brought to it. Ethan's mentor, old Pete, passed away in his sleep one winter night, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had loved. But through it all, Katherine and Ethan had each other. They watched their children grow strong and capable, James developing his father's steady leadership, Samuel showing his mother's gift with horses, and Rose proving to be as stubborn and determined as both her parents combined. They took in a young, orphaned girl named Lucy when Rose was 8, unable to turn away a child in need, and loved her as their own. When Katherine was 45, she and Ethan were working together on a distant section of the ranch, checking on cattle in the high summer pastures, when they came across a small herd that had gotten spooked by a mountain lion. Without thinking, Katherine began to sing, that same lullaby from so many years ago, and the cattle calmed immediately. Ethan sat his horse and watched her, this woman he had loved for more than 20 years, and felt the same surge of emotion he had felt that day in the lightning storm. You know, he said when the cattle were settled, I never get tired of watching you do that. Katherine rode over to him and reached out to take his hand. Her hair was streaked with gray now, and there were lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to Ethan she was just as beautiful as the day he had first seen her. And I never get tired of building this life with you. They rode home together in the golden afternoon light, hands clasped between their horses, talking about plans for next year's breeding program, and whether Samuel was serious about the girl he had been courting in Cannon City. And Katherine thought about the girl she had been, desperate to prove herself, convinced she had to choose between love and her dreams. She was grateful beyond words that she had found a man who understood she should never have to choose, who helped her build a life where she could have both. By the time Katherine was 50, the Thornton Monroe Ranch was one of the most successful operations in southern Colorado. All 3 of their children worked the ranch, James as the foreman, Samuel managing the horse breeding program, and Rose handling the business and financial side. Lucy had married a local farmer and lived nearby, bringing her own children to visit their grandmother Katherine every week. Ethan and Katherine gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations, though neither of them could truly retire. They were too in love with the work, too connected to the land and the animals. But they had more time now for each other, for long rides into the mountains, for quiet evenings on the porch watching the sun set behind the peaks. One evening, when they were both 60 years old, they sat together on that same porch where Ethan had proposed so many years before. Their hands were clasped, fingers intertwined, both sets of hands weathered and scarred from decades of ranch work. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked quietly. "Giving up the Monroe Ranch, leaving Kansas?" Katherine was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the path not taken, the life she might have had. Then she squeezed his hand and smiled. "Not for a single second. This life, this ranch, our children, this is everything I never knew I wanted. And it is so much better than anything I could have built alone. I love you, Katherine Thornton. I have loved you since the moment you rode into a lightning storm singing a lullaby, and I will love you until the day I die. I love you too, Ethan Thornton. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me, and for building this beautiful life with me." They sat together as the stars came out, the same stars that had shone down on them through decades of work and love and partnership. And Katherine thought about that spooked herd in the storm, about the split-second decision to ride toward danger instead of away from it, about the courage it took to trust her instincts and her heart. That moment had changed everything, had set her on a path she never could have imagined. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is sing in the storm. Sometimes the best decisions are made in moments of crisis. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, you find someone who sees your courage and loves you for it, who becomes your partner in every sense of the word, who helps you build a life beyond your wildest dreams. The years continued to flow past, gentle as the Arkansas River in summer, steady as the turning of the seasons. Katherine and Ethan grew old together, their steps slower but their love deeper than ever. They became grandparents many times over, and they spoiled those grandchildren shamelessly, teaching them to ride and rope and sing to nervous cattle. When Katherine was 72, she and Ethan sat on their porch one evening and watched James and his son working cattle in the distance. 4 generations of ranchers in one family. Rose and her husband had just finalized a major deal to sell their cattle to a new customer in Denver, expanding their market considerably. Samuel's horses were winning prizes at competitions across Colorado and beyond. "We did well," Ethan said softly. "We built something good." "We did," Katherine agreed. "Together." Ethan turned to look at her, this woman who had been his partner for nearly 5 decades, and smiled. "If I had that day to live over again, that day in the storm, I would not change a single thing, except maybe I would have kissed you sooner." Katherine laughed, the sound carrying across the valley they had made their home. "I would have let you." They sat together as the sun set in its familiar glory, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. And in that moment, surrounded by the life they had built, the family they had raised, and the love that had sustained them through everything, Katherine understood that she had found something better than her original dream. She had found a partnership, a true meeting of minds and hearts, and it had given her a life richer and fuller than anything she could have achieved alone. The legacy of Katherine and Ethan Thornton lived on long after they were gone, in the children and grandchildren who carried on their work, in the ranch that bore both their names, in the stories passed down about the woman who calmed a spooked herd in a lightning storm, and the man who loved her for it. Their partnership became the foundation on which their family built generation after generation, a testament to the power of respect, equality, and love. And sometimes, on stormy nights in Colorado, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the echo of an old lullaby carried on the wind, a reminder that courage and love are the two things that can calm any storm, soothe any fear, and build a life worth living.